No poetry, no poetry. Don't you hide in the cave of my being. Don't hide to life. Put down the invisible fences of my poison. Open wide the doors of my being and go. Go to struggle. Life is struggle. The man out there calling for you, and you, poetry, you are also mankind. Love the poetry of the whole world. Love mankind. Set free your poems for all races, for all things. Fail to distinguish between your body and all other bodies in the world. Confuse yourself with me. Go, poetry. Give me your arms to embrace life. My poetry is me. This is a poem by Amílcar Cabral, 1948. And the name of the poem is also My Poetry is Me. That's how it ends. So I'm going to talk freely because this is based on a research I did and also a paper to master and he's telling about the situation of the war in Guinea-Bissau. So the situation is that Portugal and Guinea-Bissau are at war since 1963. And Cabral is giving information about the situation to students, militants, and people that are interested in the liberation struggles happening in Africa. And he's telling how the war is actually developing, and behind the war, so there is in the liberated zones, there are all these schools and shops and hospitals that are being created and in the areas that are called the liberated zones. So Cabral talks, and he says the following: the manuals of guerrilla warfare generally states that a country has to be of a certain size to be able to create what is called a base, and further, that mountains are the best places to develop guerrilla warfare. But obviously, we don't have those conditions in Guinea-Bissau. But this did not stop us to begin an armed struggle. As for the mountains, we decided that our people have to take their place. So our people are our mountains. So it's unlikely that the people that were hearing these words, and particularly this sentence, our people are our mountains, would know that Cabral was actually not only a liberation leader and a theoretician and a strategic leader of this struggle, but he was also an agronomist, and also soil and the science of soil was something he was very, very close at. It is actually the material. So going back to Cabral's introduction into agronomy, Cabral was born in Guinea-Bissau, but very early he grew up in Cape Verde, and after a daughter's biography of his father, of Cabral, he witnessed a drought that happened in 1941 in Cape Verde that killed 13,000 people, and that drought made Cabral, after her daughter, made Cabral decide that he would want to study agronomy. So his interest for agronomy was also, and this is a little bit my argument, was also to link what happens in nature with historical and political conditions. So as a young agronomist, Cabral goes to Portugal, or as a young student, he's in Portugal, and he's studying agronomy, and he focused on a very specific area in Portugal, that is in Cuba, an area in Alentejo in the south of Portugal that it was in that time very eroded and very almost in the verge of becoming a desertified area. And based on these studies, I read that Cabral was very interested in searching for various concepts of soil, how you define soil. And in this introduction to this work, he, for example, tested various concepts. One of them was the more chemical proposition of the definition of soil by Liebig, that says the soil is a laboratory in which to verify various chemical reactions. Another definition that he also found interesting was the kind of more geological perspective, where you would say that actually after Richthofen, where he said that the soil is a pathological condition of the rock. But later there's another definition that he finds that is from Dukusheyev, a Russian agronomist, that actually says the soil is a natural, independent, and historical body. So, and this is maybe the definition that most interests him, that he most could link his perspective. So one of the things that is very interesting is how Cabral is actually, I'm going to change the image. This is actually the image I wanted to have before when he was in London, because this is an image where you see guerrilla people looking at the map on the soil of the guerrilla warfare. So Cabral was in this another interesting point that he puts on this research is he looks at the soil from the what he calls it a science that is called edophology, and edophology is a perspective of soil science that looks at how the soil actually acts on the living beings on top of it. So it's a down-up perspective. So there's a kind of a subjectivity of the soil and how it actually reacts and influences the bodies living on it. So another element that is very interesting in Cabral's search for definition is he sees the soil as this kind of conflict zone between lithos and atmos. And lithos is the rock and atmos is the climate. And in this conflict zone is actually where a process of what he called the meteorisation is happening, and actually where the soil is created. So the rock and the climate, rock and climate in this conflict zone actually produces the soil and produces the basis for life. So this is all elements that I think they are very interesting to reflect, and this is something I try to do in how Cabral creates a path of thinking with the soil and also the politics of the soil, and how this can actually informed later the way he leads the liberation struggle. So I will pass to another. The other part that Cabral was very interested was in the phenomena of erosion. So the erosion is not, of course, a phenomenon of how the nutrients of soil are displaced. So that's the definition, how something gets out of from the soil out of the soil. And but this can have different origins. These phenomena, it can be natural phenomena, but also can be political and historical phenomena or conditions that creates. And in a way, when Cabral was actually looking at Portuguese soil, there's something very interesting, because he focused, while actually he was interested in what was happening in Africa and in his countries, in his two countries. The first thing he does is looking at Portuguese soil, and there's something that is very interesting. He looks at the erosion process of Alentejo, of the colonizer ground and colonize the soil, and he looks at it and he says, look, you are neglecting your own soil because you are extracting the riches from other places. So basically he looks at the erosion of Portuguese soil as a kind of result as well of the colonial phenomena. So later, actually, the work that he did was even with all these elements that you have to see that he's working in under the condition of colonial Portugal, and even if he was, if we can read the in-between critique that is happening in his very academic work, he was very successful with this work and on Cuba, and was later invited by the Portuguese Overseas Ministry to go to Guinea-Bissau and start extensive agronomic work in Guinea, like starting the census of the farming practices, and also he started a very interesting project that was the Pesube farm, that is a farm that was like a garden, a colonial garden in Bissau, that he transformed it into experimental farming, and an experimental farm. So this is, we are now 1952. So the work in Cuba was happening 1948, 49. And now we are in 1952, and Cabral goes to Guinea-Bissau, and this when so I'm just passing this to shorten up. Yeah, so he starts various papers on the what he called the in defense of the earth. So how and one of the other articles he does is he writes is about the conditions of the soil in Black Africa. So how the old practice of the African practice and traditional practice, indigenous practice in Africa, are completely different than the ones that were imposed later by colonialism, and how those measures actually change the balance, not only of the soil but also of people's lives. So he was very, and this is an interesting point because he, I'm going to quote a part that I think it is very visionary, because it links also to situations that we are now living. And this is from a paper on Black Africa farming practice. So economic factors in Europe were one of the causes behind the European settlement of Africa after the age of the discoveries. With a simple trade in goods, including the enslaved black man, Europeans spent the rewards of the exploitation of the land. But like Black Africans, the aim was to produce essential food. Europeans cultivated or forced Black Africans to cultivate farm products. From the conditions created, African land is being devastated day by day. In a life that is out of balance, obliged to satisfy not only the new demands created but the requirements of new social conditions, he, the African subject, slowly uproots himself, migrates, or is forced to migrate. He abandons the land or doesn't have the time to assimilate the knowledge that he has created and accumulated over centuries. The lack of balance in the management of Black African soil encouraged the emergence of disease that deliberates the human organism. So it's very interesting how Cabral is in 1952 talking already about what actually it's happening now, the migrant crisis, and it's already like envisioning that this is going to happen due to all the conditions that are being created artificially through colonialism. Another thing that he later, so we are in 52, but later during the struggle, Cabral also tells something that is very interesting in a speech he's telling to the the guerrilla fighters. It's actually the fact that he was analyzing, so the time that he had to, while he was working for the overseas ministry as an agronomist, was a very precious time for him to collect a lot of information of how all these economical situations are happening. And one of the examples that it gives is that he was analyzing the production of peanuts in Guinea-Bissau, and how the wages compared with the taxes that people had to pay and so on, how the equation that he would make actually was equaling slave work. So basically how, through things that you don't even know that you are paying, and then actually the whole equation was equal to slave work with other means. So what I have up here is a map that I did from this moment that Cabral was actually working as an agronomist from one side, on the agronomic practice on the left side, and on the right side the cultural and political practice. So basically you can see how Cabral uses the mobility as an agronomist in behalf of Portugal state to also disguise a militant practice, and that led later to him becoming the leader of the liberation movement. So basically, you can really compare, what he was working in, first in Guinea, later in Cape Verde, and then later in Angola, and how all these works that he does for the Portuguese state were also often parallel. There was a cultural practice or a political practice, and often the cultural practice was also a form of doing politics. One of the examples that is very interesting is the House of the Students from the Empire. That was an institution that the Overseas Ministry created in Lisbon, and was a house with the aim actually to prepare young academics coming from the colonies to later propagate in their own countries Portugality. So they wanted to have good educated colonial subjects that would actually continue the empire project. But of course, what happens in the House of the Students from the Empire, it becomes a place also of subversion, and also a place that disguises culture and uses poetry, for example, as a form of communicating, as a code to reflect about the conditions and the oppression that was happening in the colonies. So Cabral, after in 1959, there is a kind of a very important moment in the history, and it's a kind of a trigger, because while the PAGC was already created in 1956, so the party that the African Liberation Party that Cabral created, and what happens is that also through the PAGC there is an uprising in the port of Pichiquiti of the merchant workers that were actually demonstrating peacefully against the conditions, working conditions and bad wages, and what happens is a massacre where the Portuguese killed around 80 people in the port, and this basically became the moment where Cabral understood that there was no negotiation that was possible on a political basis, and that he would have to start the armed struggle. So that's the verge point, and so in 1960, so 1 year later, he himself goes underground, and the House of the Students from the Empire organizes this escape, what they call the Great Escape, of hundreds of students that actually go escape Portugal through the north direction, East Berlin, and then from East Berlin to Accra, and then from Accra to the different colonies, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, and Angola. So this is to say that it's very interesting to understand how this path, the agronomic path and the cultural, poetic, and political work were actually always a parallel. That's why we created this word agro-poetics of liberation, because all of these things come together, all this knowledge of the earth, or the poetry that is also a form of like the poem that I told you in the beginning, that it's actually also an important factor of imagination, and also this political work. So I'm going back to the Subia farm, because it's very interesting to look at the project that Cabral in 1952 proposes, the program of a farm. So basically this farm was a colonial garden that from one side was producing products for the Portuguese or the white population in Guinea, or also eventually also some what they call the civilized Guineans, because there was all kind of like strata, how there was a way that you would officially become civilized if you had a certain kind of academic degree. Otherwise, you were assimilated or indigenous. So there was all kinds of grades of production of otherness. And what I wanted to say is like how the experimental farm, the program for the experimental farm, that was divided in 3 proposals. One of the proposal was actually that the farm should be a place of research. So it would change from a recreational place and food production for the privileged to become a place of research, of experiment with farming practice. The second was to tear down the hierarchies between the state and the farmers. So it will be a place where the farmers could work freely, and it would be an horizontal structure. And the third idea and the third proposal was that it would be a place of exchange between farmers from the other countries of the region or other areas. So it would be a place also of bringing people and learning together. So it's a very interesting, because you can also almost extrapolate the farming, the experimental farming proposals to an art center or today's, or even the theory of culture that Cabral envisioned. So another element that is very interesting for me is like that was interesting comparing entangling the agronomic work and the political work, was how Cabral was searching for a kind of a reclamation of language, of soil language. So basically he would through his knowledge and through his experience that he had on land, and he was proposing to change certain forms, certain semantics, and also some words. One example, it's interesting, is how he says that the Guinea-Bissau has no rivers, that the Portuguese gave names to the old countries, but it's a flat country with 70% of its land under seawater level. So it's in a permanent tidal change. And actually what you have is what he calls the arms of the sea, because you have salty water until the end of dry land. So basically he says that the Portuguese named rivers to those arms of the sea, but actually because they don't have an experience of what is an alluvian land, a flooded land. So he said that we have to change this. So this is an example how we say we have to change the names because it's also a form of reclaiming our land and also reclaiming the language itself. So and this is also an argument. This is imagine that all these arguments is giving during he's talking with militant people, or is in the jungle talking with the peasants that are, and so it's always a form, is a form of being connected with the conditions of people's lives, but at the same time gaining a consciousness of these conditions and finding a language for it. So another very interesting, I mean, there's many examples that I give also in the paper I wrote. That is what he called that the strategy of a centrifugal movement in the struggle. So basically, one of the things is that so the struggle starts in 1953 in the center of the country, in a place called Moresh. And Cabral was saying that actually the Portuguese were waiting, that were placing all these military forces in the borders with the other countries, with the northern country, with Senegal or with Guinea-Conakry, because they were expecting that the Guineans would attack his own land. So this is also, how, and Cabral said, no, but we started the struggle in the center because it's also the people's struggle, and the people are the mountain you need to do the struggle, and the struggle will move centrifugal from the center to the borders. So this is also something that was not only strategically very efficient, but also there's an eloquency of this concept that is both. So in a way, like the situated knowledge that Cabral had of its relation with the land informs the certainty of the strategy, of the war strategy. So the other, and this is also very interesting because this, I mean, I later make a parallel also with this, revolution is also this movement of the celestial bodies, like that they, it's where the word comes from, the revolution of celestial bodies, but also as a form of struggle. So the other, just to complete, I don't know, I don't have a, so how are? I have to finish, so I'm really doing that. Just to give you a later, so one of the interesting things, just to connect also with the research that I did previously, was a research about cinema and Guinean cinema, and it's very interesting that the first project that the filmmakers wanted to do, because the Guinean filmmakers were trained by Cabral in Cuba, so they were sent by Amílcar Cabral to Cuba. It's another story, but it's interesting that the first project that they do, or that they and was actually connecting cinema with agriculture. So they had a project called Guinea-Bissau 6 years after. So this is actually 6 years after liberation, 1974, and they are actually shooting. There's a lot of footage. The film was never finished, but one of the proposals of the Institute of Cinema that they created in this moment of liberation was exactly that cinema would function as a form of creating an exchange between the different farming practice and so documenting how people work with the land in the south and showing it in the north, and like that, creating an exchange. So it was also a kind of a cine agronomy in a way. So I think I just wanted to close to explain that for me, what is very interesting is was not to do an academic work, even actually that I wanted also to think in Grass, Shelley Sheikh, and also Rose Gray, because actually they made me take this research and make it into an academic paper. That once was a struggle. I'm not an academic, but it was a struggle, and it was also very interesting for me. But one of the main interests for me was to think how to look at this, make this research as something that can be useful today. Because I think the path that Cabral did from informing all the struggle through looking at the soil and seeing how the soil actually also is a body that speaks, and that gives you as a subjectivity that that informs what is happening on Earth and what are the politics and the conditions of people on Earth. And so what I propose with this is that actually Cabral was already, before the word Anthropocenic was invented, maybe 10 years ago, Cabral was already actually thinking in that condition, how the condition of the earth and the defense of the earth is also connected with the politics on Earth. And so he informed all this struggle, I think, through this knowledge, and I think they are very inspiring for us also to think today new struggles to fight the colonialisms that we are living today. So I also wanted to thank just Ahmed Ismaildin that helped me to do this drawing that I was basically I transformed the paper into a drawing on the floor together with Ahmed Ismaildin that actually he made the main conception of this drawing, and this was just in August in Savi, and I gave the talk actually with the mapping